Hi, I'm Jim Gabe, founder of Citizen Arts. Welcome to a More or Less Perfect Union 2024, our nationwide discussion that digs into the USA's fast-evolving political, cultural, and social drama in a different way. This isn't a focus group or poll about political preferences. It's more like a town hall, an in-depth, substantive exploration of some of the issues and events that may matter most to Americans as the election approaches. You may find in their collective opinions clues about how America will vote. That's how it turned out in our more or less perfect union 2 years ago, before the surprising midterm elections. I'm so honored to be hosting this podcast, to have a respectful, constructive dialogue with fellow citizens from varying backgrounds with differing political views, joining us from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the Gulf to the Great Lakes. I think you'll come to know and appreciate each of them. They're thoughtful, engaged, caring, and not shy about speaking their minds. They are listed on our website, citizenartscreative.org. And now, a More or Less Perfect Union 2024. Hello, everybody around the USA. We have a lot to explore. Let's start our discussion at the local level in your daily lives. What's one thing you feel good about locally?
Danny, West Hollywood. I feel good about the particular area I'm in. I might even call it my bubble. Feels like mostly everyone around me shares the same political view.
Chris, Charlotte, the neighborhood I live in is diverse and friendly and accommodating and fast growing. People come from all over the country and we all seem to get along.
Cindy, New Hampshire, the last couple years in our state, people have kind of gotten out of their comfort zone and have banded together.
Massachusetts, my neighborhood is very hustling, bustling. More businesses are coming back. It's kind of a pretty good already, but we want to see more like the pre-COVID era.
Adolfo, Louisiana. Recently, our suburb of New Orleans held its very first Pride Parade. People thought it couldn't happen, and it was a family-friendly affair. There were several thousand people. It was peaceful, it was fun, and it was a celebration of joy, and that was a great way to start off the summer.
Alfred, Hawaii. I've noticed a lot more activism, especially in our youth. It's been nice seeing people get more engaged, like politically, and seeing things that people care about being addressed out in the streets and out in public.
Geo, Texas, there's a great sense of community and togetherness in my community. People help each other, and it exemplifies what the American spirit's about.
Gabby, Connecticut. One of the things that I've really been happy to see is that despite there being a lot of divisiveness among adults, the youth in our community have stepped up, and rather than focusing on negatives, have worked hard to accomplish things. There's a group of youth who have partnered with local restaurants to help them start composting, and they created a swap shop where people can drop off and pick up things.
Brian, Richmond's ascension into a place people want to come visit. So it's an interesting and welcome change that Richmond is trying to keep up with the times.
Susan, California. There's a strong and growing awareness of the danger of wildfires. I live in a rural area, and wildfires are increasingly common and extraordinarily dangerous. And there are all sorts of local efforts, not just to educate people, but to get them to clear their property, to make it safer for firefighters to try to fight fires.
Kelly from Northern Virginia. I really like that where I live, it's a lot of military, a lot of law enforcement, and nobody gets away with anything.
Sanjay, New York City. One thing that I feel good about is the diversity of the electorate in Manhattan and the surrounding boroughs. I believe we have a lot of progressive voices here, and the country needs more of that at this crucial time.
Okay, we're staying with the local level, and here we're going to go with another headline, something that's going on that bugs you.
Massachusetts, the rules, regulations, and requirement for putting a permit to do a renovations or get a license for running lodging houses is totally absurd and complicated, make it so hard for a small business owner to operate.
Danny, West Hollywood, I'm just seeing a little bit of discord creeping in. I'm starting to see infiltration of ideas and of methods of communication that are not quite kosher with me.
Chris, Charlotte, in such a fast growing city, just the challenges of mobility and getting around town, traffic is becoming worse. There doesn't seem to be a really concerted and unified effort to solve some of these problems.
Cindy, New Hampshire, my one main thing is parental rights. And in New Hampshire, we've signed a couple of bills that kind of give more rights to other entities. And I think parents should have full rights over their own children.
Gabby, Connecticut. We live in a small town where a lot of people know each other, and the most recent elections have gotten really nasty as far as things put out on social media around people who are volunteering their time to serve on local boards.
Geo, Texas, you can't control this, but we've had so much rain in the area, over 48 inches, and that's normally what we get for the year. We've had roads washed away, and many people can't help but thinking, how man may be affecting climate.
Alfred, Hawaii, the military haven't really been doing a good job managing the cleanup of Red Hill. And then in general, builders are building skyscrapers and doing things that aren't really in the benefit of the local community here.
Adolfo, Louisiana. There's been some vilification of librarians and teachers by some school board members and by others who want to control books in the library, who want to control educational texts to such a degree that they fit their particular narrative. And it's gotten ugly and dangerous for a few people.
Brian, Richmond, one thing that upsets me is the incredible wealth disparity where I live.
Susan, California. I agree with Brian about wealth disparity.
Karen, Chicago, it's the crime rate, specifically the enormous amount of shootings we have.
Kelly, Northern Virginia, teacher pay. I teach one county north of me because they pay better and they did not approve raises in the county where my kids go to school, which means they're going to lose good teachers.
Sanjay, New York City, the extremely high cost of living, especially real estate. My wife and I are currently priced out of the market, and that's with both of us having good jobs, and we still can't afford to buy an apartment.
Thank you very much. All right, now let's move to the national picture. What's one thing that makes you feel good about the USA as a whole?
Cindy, New Hampshire, I love that we are diverse and that we do try to solve our problems. We do jump through hoops to try to help fix them.
Chris, Charlotte, I'm most proud about the resilience of our country and our ability to continue to rally and grow from challenging times like COVID.
Danny, West Hollywood, I love the diversity, the different kinds of people, and our general ability to work together to get things done.
Massachusetts, our democracy, let the true voices speak out and speak up.
Adolfo, Louisiana. This is an election year. There will be debates, vitriol, but I love that I get to participate democratically in elections. I bring my children into the voting booth with me. It's something I treasure.
Alfred, Hawaii, there's a lot more pushback when it comes to people's rights that we fought for 20, 30, 50 years ago. There's people still fighting for it.
Geo, Texas, I do have friends all over the United States. They're feeling more empowered to make choices. And that's always good because then they're going to be active.
Gabby, Connecticut. I'm involved with a youth civics group that does voter registration drives for young new voters. And there's a lot of enthusiasm from those kids about the prospect of voting, more than I would have expected.
Kelly, Northern Virginia, the incredible freedom that we have in this country.
Karen, Chicago, our free speech.
Susan, California. I agree with Karen that the ability to speak your mind, even though sometimes those conversations get a little bit testy, it's a fundamental part of our democracy.
Brian, Richmond, the right to vote.
Okay, my next question is, what is just not working for you on a national level? Just a headline, something that particularly irks you.
Massachusetts, I voted for Joe Biden last time out of the fear of the street riots and more fighting among the different protesters. I'm more thinking maybe we should give back to Donald Trump, who may end the wars, who may approach peaceful resolution negotiations.
Danny, West Hollywood, I'm worried that diversity that I love so much is being turned against itself based on race and religion and political party.
Chris, Charlotte, I'm most worried about the erosion of citizenship and what it means to be a responsible American and putting our shared constitutional values ahead of political ideology. We're losing that.
Cindy, New Hampshire. I think my biggest issue is education, that people would seek for the truth, not their own truth, but the truth, and that we would have a desire to teach the things that our country was founded on. I've been studying more about the Constitution and what our country stands for and how we got to this great place. And now we're going backwards. Education is a big part of that.
Gabby, Connecticut. Something that irks me is that media has moved away from journalism and become entertainment. And the way that they create entertainment is to amplify division, maybe more so than it truly exists between people.
Geo, Texas, inflation is real. People are feeling it, and it's going to play a major role in the election.
Alfred, Hawaii. That division that Gabby mentions is like very real. I feel like the divisive politics are part of the system. They're playing that on purpose. That's just the way that people get into power and try and keep their power. This isn't a game for you to take power. This is a game to take care of people. And if you're getting in the government for power, then you're there for the wrong reason.
Adolfo, Louisiana. I have noticed how little facts and truth seem to matter, whether it's driven by the media or driven by those in power. I am not sure what the culprit is. I just find in an alarming way that facts matter less than they used to in the national discussion.
Brian, Richmond, what's not working for me on the national level is Harris versus Trump. It's directly Trump. And Harris represents a system manipulated by special interest and money at the cost of the citizens.
Susan, California, really upset with the Supreme Court decision that gives presidents virtual immunity for prosecution for anything they do that's part of their official duties and a presumption of immunity from anything that might be part of their duties.
Karen, Chicago, the possibility of a recession.
Kelly, Northern Virginia, the economy.
Sanjay, New York City. In terms of the national level, what is not working for me right now is the debate around the United States immigration policies.
The first part of our discussion focused on what works or doesn't work for you locally and nationally. You made some really good points that speak to your daily experience. Interestingly, with a few exceptions, you didn't mention some of the hottest button issues that always seem to be in the national political discussion and that can dominate the headlines. I'm curious about whether these issues are pushing your buttons as Election Day approaches. Let's start with reproductive rights, abortion.
Chris, Charlotte, I don't like that it has dominated the political discourse for the better part of the last 50 years, and that it has reduced so many of us to a binary choice and a single issue that's driving our votes and our politics.
Danny, West Hollywood, as a man, I basically feel I should have no say on abortion. But as a human being, I think everybody should have a choice on how their body is treated. And that is a basic right. And I think that right should be based on science and not thought and moralization.
Massachusetts, I am for abortion. At the same time, I think we need to do more education and advocating for encouraging women to have children and support them in a substantial way to be both productive citizens, employed, at the same time be able to raise babies and children.
Cindy, New Hampshire. Well, I have 13 children, so you might know what my viewpoint is. It's been a hard road, but I have 13 amazing people that were mine. And I think education, again, is the key to teach the young women how special they are and how much a privilege it is to have and raise children. If we believed that as a society, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Gabby, Connecticut. Abortion is a topic that matters to me, not so much personally at this stage of my life, but for others to really have a choice. It's not for me to make that decision for somebody else, and it's not for me to decide what's right for somebody else.
Geo, Texas, I think that every life has a right to be born, and they should have that opportunity. And we can't hold it against kids that parents were irresponsible.
Adolfo, Louisiana. My Catholicism shouldn't matter to everybody the same way that it matters to me. And so what I believe about fetal development and ensoulment and those things are religious in nature. It's an imposition of my faith on others who may not share it to take abortion away. So while it makes me very uncomfortable to say so and to admit, I think access to abortion has to be the law of the land if we're going to truly be the America that we say we are, a pluralistic society.
Alfred, Hawaii. As far as abortion is concerned, for me, it's not my call. I don't feel like the government should have any say in that. That's the bodily function of a woman. It's not my body.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. A lot of people are upset with the Supreme Court decision, but the Supreme Court did not ban abortion. What they did was they put it back to the states. So if you don't like the abortion law, go to your local state and county.
Karen, Chicago. The abortion rights issue is disturbing on a national level. I think that we may have better interactions with both parties if that topic was just taken off of the political debates. I think that it's really a moral and religious issue. We're supposed to have separation of church and state. So I think people should be able to make those moral decisions without it being any sort of a law that prohibits abortion. And that's regardless of whether I personally agree with it or not.
Susan, California. I am horrified that young women today across the nation don't have the same freedom of choice that young women had when I was young. And it should be a personal decision. It ought to be a woman's right to decide whether or not to get pregnant, or if she is pregnant, to decide whether or not she is ready to have that baby. And that is a decision for the woman, her partner, and the doctor. It's nobody else's decision, and it's nobody's right to stick their nose into what is a very personal topic.
Kelly, Northern Virginia, we do have biological proof now that a baby is alive and well from conception. So we're not just talking about the woman's rights, but the baby's rights as well.
Karen, Chicago. I just want to clarify what I said. I think that our nation would be able to work together a little bit better if that topic were not on the ticket. I think it's something that should not be argued about year after year. Kelly, I agree with what you said. We have way more technology now to be able to see the development of a fetus. I also agree with Susan that it's a woman's personal decision. I just think that it's something that clouds our nation's ability to run properly. There are enormous issues in our country and around the world. Conservative and liberal could maybe work together a little bit more to solve some of the other problems that we have.
Susan, California. Well, I certainly agree that it would be better left off of the political agenda. Abortion is an intensely personal and difficult decision, and it ought to be private. It ought not to be something that the state controls and outsiders tell a couple what to do.
Brian, Richmond, I firmly believe in a woman's right to choose, and that's kind of where I leave it. There are so many secondary issues that come from this issue, right? Like it has a sprawl effect in many families, many different ways, economically, relationships. I agree with Susan and Karen about keeping it as a personal issue and off of the mainstream.
Sanjay, New York City. Here we are with the Dobbs ruling. And I think that it is really sad for our country and especially women. I don't think that 9 people should decide what women can do with their bodies. I don't think anybody should be able to tell a woman what she can do with her body except the woman, her doctor, and her family. And everybody else is extraneous and irrelevant in that decision.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. Gun violence / gun rights.
Danny in West Hollywood. I believe in a person's right to own a gun, but I also believe that guns should be treated like any other dangerous item that people get, like a car where you need a license. Just so much rhetoric around putting sensible gun laws in action, because anything that is done to curb gun violence or gun ownership of people who shouldn't have guns is seen as a direct threat to the Second Amendment, which was written before we had automatic weapons. So I'm for gun ownership with sensible gun laws.
Cindy, New Hampshire. I live in a state where the right to carry is prevalent, and a lot of people, that's their one hill to die on, literally. I did take a gun class because I heard a lot about it. I haven't had guns in my house because I do have children and they do get curious, and I know that's an issue. And I do believe in them. I kind of feel like we should train kids from a young age and respect the guns so that we can use them for protection. They're not to play with. I do believe in guns. I appreciate people that know how to use them, but I'm personally not into using them myself.
Chris, Charlotte.
So I've never owned a firearm, and I don't anticipate that ever changing. That's not to say I don't appreciate the intent of the Second Amendment or people's right to keep and bear arms. I recognize that firearms are part of our culture, for better or worse. People love to hunt. People love shooting sports in this country. And yeah, people feel the need to have firearms for personal protection and self-defense. But we also have to look at the data. We are by far, in the United States, we have the highest homicide rate of anywhere in the developed world. And the reason for that is the widespread availability of firearms. Other countries have mental health issues, poverty, and socioeconomic challenges. But the distinction between our homicide rate and their homicide rates is firearms. And I think we can improve education and training on firearm safety. We can improve background checks. We can establish tighter registration and licensing of firearms on a broader national level. If you can regulate the First Amendment with the Federal Election Commission and the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission and entities like that. Why can't you regulate the Second Amendment?
From Massachusetts, I am against guns. The main reason is Second Amendment was written 250 years ago, about different from what it is today in terms of population, mental health situations, and so on. As we know, most of the gun violence were committed by people suffering from depression, mental illness, emotional impaired, or angry. Who are the victims? Children, high school, college students, all the most vulnerable, promising, hoping to be the future of our country. They are the victims. As parents, as grown-ups, we have to be responsible and look at the issues, not in terms of it's my right to carry a gun, but in terms of what are the consequences. Are we really protecting our freedom, our democracy, our own lives, or we give excuses for others who should not possess the guns, have opportunity to commit the crimes?
Cindy, New Hampshire, I'd just like to make a comment on that. The people that obey rules and laws obey the rules and laws, but the people who don't. A lot of good people protect other people. And those are the people that we want to have guns. And they do obey the rules. The people that have the guns legally obey all the rules we have. And I don't think we need to have any more. In my state, there's very few talk about shooting people because people everywhere are carrying guns and it makes other people less likely to commit crimes.
Alfred, Hawaii. For guns, I see why people would want them. I understand that the world isn't a super safe place all the time, but I guess it depends. I think there's a value to having them, but at the same time, I think there should be a little bit more control over how you can get them and for what purposes. Like, yeah, if people want to go hunting, but just like driving a motorcycle or driving a car, you should have more licensing, a little bit more education on it. Like, you shouldn't be able to go to a gun show and just like pick one up.
Adolfo, Louisiana. And I guess I have to mention this. My mother committed suicide. She shot herself with my father's handgun. So I don't know that I'm free from bias on this issue. It's there in the Constitution of the United States. It's impractical to suggest that we can eliminate all guns from society. It's impractical and unwise. As Alfred said, hunting is valuable. Self-defense is a right and is valuable. But I'm not sure bump stocks are necessary for hunting or self-defense. I'm not certain that allowing weapons to be purchased without the same scrutiny that we give to certain medicines or that we give to, as Alfred said, vehicles is wise. I don't think we can eliminate all crime. I harbor no illusions about that. But man, if we didn't have to do shooter drills at school, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Geo, Texas, the Second Amendment is there for a reason. You look at history, the atrocities committed when a country is unarmed, and I'm all for it. Second Amendment.
Gabby, Connecticut. I think Adolfo said it really well. I have to wonder whether our forefathers would have the Second Amendment be written in the same way if they had to write it today.
Adolfo, Louisiana. One of the cool things about the history of the Constitution is it was finished, right? Madison turned it in. We voted on it. And we added 10 amendments to it. That was the very first thing that we did with a completed Constitution. We have since added more amendments. We have to stop treating this document that it is written by God. It's written by really smart guys who put in a process to change it. I don't know anyone who wants to ban all guns. I'm in 100% agreement that there is a right to bear arms for a multitude of reasons. But again, there has to be some wisdom in how that's applied. And currently, there's no wisdom. There's just tragedy. And that is something that I, as an American, am just not willing to live with.
Brian, Richmond, I've had far too many experiences with gun violence. Where I work, I've seen children shoot each other. I've seen a 10-year-old die. and I'm over all of the guns. The fact that this country has more guns than people is absurd. It is baffling to me that we choose to live this way. But that Second Amendment isn't going anywhere in my lifetime. So I guess I just need to get better protection.
Susan, California. I don't have much to add to that. The issue of gun violence was very much in the news and people's lives a few years ago. And then there was a huge infusion of federal money. And thankfully, in the communities where the violence was the greatest, the violence has gone down. So there are programs that can make a big difference, but they cost a lot of money.
Aaron, Chicago. I think people should have the right to bear arms, but people's liberties or rights are just taken way too far. There's no reason there should be this many guns on the streets and people killing each other with them. It's a systemic social problem that is so disturbing. And that's really all I have to say about it.
Sanjay, New York City. In terms of gun rights, I think the battle was lost a long time ago. There's a viral tweet that goes around every time there's another mass shooting about how when we allowed Sandy Hook to happen and watched parents mourning the deaths of tiny children and did nothing about it, we lost the battle. And really, all that happens now is the same cycle: mass shooting, thoughts and prayers, and no action. People are being killed every single day from gun violence, and it's an epidemic in our country, and we're doing nothing about it.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. The gun laws are already there. Criminals, by definition, don't follow laws. So you need good people with guns to combat. I live where there's a lot of military, law enforcement. In the state of Virginia, you have to have a permit to carry concealed, but you don't have to have a permit to open carry. So it's very normal just to see people open carrying. There would never be a mass shooting where I live because there would be someone right away at the first gunshot to shoot. I'm watching the news and there's lots of violence. They had to send the National Guard to the subways in New York City. Read the book, More Guns, Less Crime. And you will see that the biggest states, counties, cities with the highest gun laws have the most gun violence, because all that does is make the law-abiding citizens not have guns. By the way, we wouldn't even be a country right now because King George III was for gun control. Hitler was for gun control. There's no guns in North Korea, so none of them can uprise. There's no guns in China. So you can see all these countries that have dictators have the biggest gun laws, and it keeps the citizens from being able to rise up against the government who is a dictator.
We're going to move to our next topic, and that's immigration. Please share your feelings about this hot button issue.
Chris, Charlotte.
I lived in Texas for 30 years and saw firsthand the influence of immigrants on the state. And, I can't imagine what it would have been like culturally without the influence of immigration. That's not to say there aren't any problems with immigration. Clearly there are, but I question whether those with the loudest voices on the issue actually want to solve the problem versus just politicize it or deny a problem exists. We do need to have better controls on the flow of immigrants into the country, and we need to have the systems to keep better track of them when they're here. But we also need to make it easier for them to both be here legally and on a path to citizenship, because we need them. Latin American immigrants are filling essential jobs that native-born citizens won't take. And if you waved a magic wand and they all disappeared from within our borders, it would have disastrous consequences. I've seen studies that show undocumented immigrants have a net positive impact on the economy. And, the fears and hysteria about crime are unfounded because they commit crimes at a lower rate than citizens. With very few exceptions, the people are coming here to, find a better life and future for their families. It shouldn't matter whether they, come from the South or from the West, from the East or the North. If they embrace our American values and ethics and respect and understand our Constitution and contribute to our collective good, who am I to say they shouldn't be here?
Danny, West Hollywood, originally from El Paso, Texas. I visit home often. I don't see this large invasion of people coming over and invading our country as the media would have us believe. I agree with Chris. Immigration is a positive thing. They take the jobs that other people don't want to do. So people screaming, they're taking our jobs. It's like, really? These are the jobs you want? When did you apply for the corn picker? It's just crazy to me how immigration is being used as a political tool to scare people into voting one way or the other. The Republican Party has wanted this immigration deal for the longest time, and they finally get a bipartisan deal going. And Donald Trump says to his guys, I don't want you to do that because if you solve it during Joe Biden's time, then I don't have anything to run on. And that just irks me to no end.
Cindy, New Hampshire. I do hear that there are immigrants coming from Canada into our state, and they'll come right into people's yards and there's nothing they can do about it. I like the idea that maybe it's just fake and it's just being used as a political tool, but I feel like it's true. And there are a lot of people coming in and not just taking our jobs, but they're being given a lot of benefits that a lot of native citizens don't have. I do believe that it should be regulated at the borders and people should have rules on how to go about coming into our country. I'm not against it. I just want it to be more defined as to how it can be done.
Massachusetts, I see a big confusion and discord in our immigration policy. Legal approaches for applying visa, applying work permit, coming to this country is so difficult, is so blocked. On the other hand, illegal immigrants, a lot of loopholes, a lot of avenues. As a result, people who prefer to come in via the legal way cannot come in. Therefore, they approach in an illegal and very hard way.
Gabby, Connecticut. I'm the daughter of two immigrants. I am a first-generation American. So I do think about it. Immigrants for generations have come and in many ways made us a better place. They've come with ambition, drive, and goals. That's certainly not all immigrants. It's a difficult situation. We have to look at what's happening in our communities and whether our communities can sustain the growth in population.
Geo, Texas. To me, all you need to know is that all these sanctuary cities, once they started getting the immigrants that come across the border here in Texas, they started complaining and yelling and hooing and hawing that they can't sustain it. Well, you yourself claim to be a sanctuary city. I'm Hispanic. I'm for immigration, but legal immigration. What's happened at the border is atrocious.
Adolfo, Louisiana. I too am first generation born to immigrants. My father's from Cuba. Came here at first illegally, and then, of course, with stroke of a pen, it was all of a sudden legal. As Gabby points out, there is a rich tradition of immigration in the United States. After Hurricane Katrina, when New Orleans was absolutely destroyed, the people who rebuilt New Orleans were immigrants from Central America. So that's a debt that has to be repaid. By the same token, Gio has a point. Completely unfettered access to the United States cannot be sustained. I wish it would have happened through legislation, but I'm appreciative of the Biden administration signing into the presidential executive order. There's been a 40% drop in illegal immigration since that particular action. I just wish Congress, on both sides, by the way, would take meaningful action. There has to be a pathway for citizenship for people who are here. There has to be an opportunity for people who are fleeing horrid conditions and are attempting to get to a place that they know they can make a life. In some cases, we had a hand in destabilizing their region. I do think there is a way that we can control access to the United States of America while at the same time being driven by humanitarian concerns.
Alfred, Hawaii. I agree with Adolfo. There's also that aspect of the way the laws are applied right now. when it comes to who can come and who can't. We have higher quotas for certain European countries than we do for most other countries when it comes to being able to immigrate here. It should be a more fair system for people that aren't rich.
Kelly from Northern Virginia. So I think it's very dangerous that we have all these people coming in. There's been crimes committed because of these immigrants, and we don't have enough room. Texas was dealing with this for a long time before they started sending them to other cities. And now other cities are seeing, oh, wow, this is a lot of people. We can't handle them all. I met recently somebody who did it legally. They were immigrants from Afghanistan. They were very grateful for our country and loved our freedom and everything we had here. So, I mean, let immigrants come in the legal way, and there's a process.
Susan, California. I live in a county that's the economy is tied to agriculture. We could not function without immigrants. People are forced to take agricultural jobs because often they can't qualify for anything else when they come in. They don't know English. They may only have a second grade education, but they are extremely hardworking, and their number one goal is that their children get an education so they can get jobs where they can sit down.
Kelly from Northern Virginia. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have any immigrants. My husband works in the landscape business, and some of Trump's immigration policies hurt him because he hired a lot from Mexico and they're great workers. I'm just talking about having free and open borders where just anybody can come in, and we're getting criminals coming in, and we've seen crime from these people coming in.
Karen, Chicago, the issue does not come down to whether we are anti-immigration or anti a certain type of person or, anti a country. It just comes down to the sheer number, which is out of hand. And at some point, tough decisions do have to be made. And I tend to feel that the borders should have been closed a long time ago, or the numbers capped a long time ago. It has to do with the amount of resources that we have and that we're able to offer. It has gotten terribly out of hand.
Brian, Richmond, as far as the border and immigration, yeah, I do feel the United States hasn't had a good system or plan in place for a long time. We have seen it, drugs being smuggled in the United States. It's complex. And I agree that we're kind of capped out right now with resources.
Susan, California. Until a few years ago, it was primarily people from Mexico and Central America who were coming in. Now we are getting huge numbers of immigrants from Africa, from Asia, all over the globe. People are trying to enter America, and it is a problem. And there do need to be caps on the numbers, and there need to be humane exceptions for people who truly are fleeing violence. But with all our faults, it makes me so proud that people from all over the world want to come to America and get any job they can, because coming to America is the dream, just as it was 200 years ago.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. I agree with the last thing Susan said. But what do you think about the fact that a majority of the Chinese immigrants are men of military age? That's not a little suspicious, is it? Just putting that out there.
Brian, Richmond, I also wanted to add, if you look at the last 150 years, convicts have been coming to this country. It isn't anything new.
Sanjay from New York City. I have a personal philosophy about immigration because my life never would have turned out the way it has if my parents weren't allowed into the country. They came here legally, but not everybody has the luxury to do that. I don't think the people that are coming here who are undocumented are, coming here to commit crimes. They're coming for a better life. And I think it's really sad and generally racist about how a lot of undocumented immigrants have been treated in our media. And it's even more sad to see President Biden essentially adopt the same policies as Donald Trump when it comes to immigration. This is a country that was built on immigrants. Every single person who is a citizen of this United States, at one point, someone in their family was an immigrant. We've forgotten about the ideals that our country was founded on and have become so insular. And it's really unfortunate in terms of attracting talented and hardworking people from all across the world.
Now, the topic that Gio raised earlier, something close to home, cost of living, inflation. How is it affecting you? Is it something that might influence how you feel about your candidates at the local and national level?
Massachusetts. Since I'm in the field of real estate and small inns, bed and breakfast business, we have to repair ceilings and so on. The contractors always ask for more. Building materials are 3 times as much as before. And our water bills are just increased. Sewage went up. And my employees, I have to raise their paychecks to stay on the jobs. On the other hand, I cannot increase the rent or hotel rates too much because there is a lot of supply of housing units and even hotel. I have to compete with Airbnb.
Hong, let me ask you a question. Is it a political issue that you feel can be corrected at the ballot box?
No, I feel we printed out too much money. This problem was traced back to when they were trying to make the economy good in the 1990s.
Cindy, New Hampshire, my husband makes twice as much as he did before. I work a full-time job, plus I do part-time jobs, plus I'm starting a new business online and still don't have any extra money. So definitely something's wrong. It's really sad for me, for my children, because they have to spin their wheels twice as hard. In New Hampshire, we have 400 state representatives. We have a choice of who those representatives are. We have a voice. Some things are in motion that we can't really change easily. But if we work together, I think we can at least start making better choices and changes.
Chris, Charlotte, I think we all feel it. There are complex explanations. Inflation was a global issue coming out of the pandemic with supply chains disrupted. And it's going to be a political issue at the ballot. People ultimately vote their wallets and they feel the pain. No matter how much you try to convince folks that the economy is enjoying great growth, a dollar doesn't go as far as it used to. I see it with my son, who's in his mid-20s. He makes a good living, but he doesn't have any hope of owning a home anytime soon because of where interest rates are and where the cost of housing is. It's got to be, one of the top issues going into the election.
Danny, West Hollywood. I retired less than a year ago, and my pension is enough to cover my basics. It's gotten a little crazier than I anticipated. I had no idea prices would go up for basic groceries when you go out and eat a meal. It's like crazy. It is going to be a political issue, even though the supply chain mostly came back to normal. Prices didn't go back down. It's like, yeah, we'll raise them at any chance we get. We need some kind of regulation. I don't know if it's a presidential thing to help stop inflation at that level, but I would sure love for someone to do something.
Gabby, Connecticut. I am probably 2 weeks away from paying 2 college tuitions. So it is 100% something I am thinking about. That paired with, I happen to be married to a physician, and physicians tend to make less every year or work more to make the same every year.
Geo, Texas, Gabby, I'm in the same position. My wife is a internal medicine doctor. Yes, inflation is a concern. Everybody talks about it. The cost of food is where we've seen the highest rise. In my community, it's mainly older retired people, so they don't have a lot of other expenses per se, but the cost of food is definitely a concern.
Adolfo, Louisiana. We are a household of 6. Inflation is very much on my mind when we go to the grocery store. It has changed the way that we shop. I'm sitting in my home and our downstairs air conditioner is off to keep our electricity bill a little lower. I am aware that the rate of inflation is trending downwards year over year, just not fast enough.
Alfred, you don't have any inflation concerns over there in Hawaii, do you?
Very much so. It's super expensive, especially since we have to import the majority of our food. When we moved here, and it's only been a few years ago, we could go to the grocery store and spend $100 for the week. I'm lucky now to be able to spend $100 for enough groceries for a few days.
Brian, Richmond, cost of living ties directly to the wealth gap and how people are able to absorb the inflation. People want to make political arguments, conservative versus liberal, but it's really the haves versus the have-nots. The gap has been widening for the last 40 years. COVID exacerbated it.
Susan, California. I agree that the wealth gap is a huge problem. And we see it locally because housing has gotten so ridiculously expensive that people like our school teachers, law enforcement people, city and county employees can't afford to live here. We need tax reform. We need to tax people of means and make it easier for the lower income people to have a decent standard of living.
Karen, Chicago. I think that inflation and the cost of living is probably the worst it's been since I can remember. I don't know how people living on minimum wage or just a lower income are able to make ends meet. I retired from teaching and pull in a pension, but it's not a high one. So I do still have to work. And it feels like my financial situation is getting grimmer.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. A lot of the policies that Biden put into place when he first got into office are now the result of this. The minimum wage, higher taxes. I believe everyone should have a fair wage, but the problem is that when you raise the minimum wage, small businesses have to raise their prices. It's just basic economics. The economy is a direct reflection of Biden, and he officially has beat Jimmy Carter for the worst president ever.
Susan, California. Well, I couldn't disagree more with that last comment, but I will not say any more at this point.
Why?
I don't think it serves the purposes of our conversation. We're supposed to be able to conduct ourselves as thoughtful, respectful adults.
So are you saying that because I said Biden was the worst president ever, that I'm not conducting myself as respectful? Because that's just my opinion.
I'm not saying that. I was saying I think Kelly and I can disagree, period.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on. Go ahead, Adolfo.
What I find really interesting about the discussion over inflation is Target, Walmart, McDonald's, and some other larger retailers have recently lowered their prices on certain items since this has become a focus of national discussion. And it does make me wonder how it took this level of discussion for them to do something about it. They're still going to make money.
I wonder about that too. Some prices seem exorbitant. And then on the other hand, I just bought something on Amazon. It was so cheap, my mouth dropped. It's confusing. And I don't know where you point. So I'm going to ask all of you a question. If you feel that your vote at the national level come November could have an impact on inflation, cost of living. I'm trying to find out if the political equation is a factor here. Raise your hands if you think it is. It's just about a split. It's a complicated issue. I think we all know that. We're now going to go to a topic that has come up several times, climate change. Is it one of the pressing issues in this election cycle? You were mentioning, Gio, the amount of rain you've had in Texas. There are people who would say that is due to man-made changes in our atmosphere. Where do you come from on that?
I do believe that man does affect the climate. What I'm usually hesitant about is the proposed solutions for that.
Where's the breakdown for you on solution?
The fear mongering. People don't like that. It doesn't resonate. Let's look for true solutions about the problems we may be facing. Like Gabby said earlier, the news is there to sensationalize. We're no longer doing news. We're doing Jerry Springer on live TV, basically.
Cindy, New Hampshire. Well, I believe in climate change. It's in our face all the time. But I'm a little worried because people believe in solar panels. There aren't many days we actually have sun instead of clouds. And yet people want solar panels all over New Hampshire. They believe that the solar panels will save us money. It just doesn't make sense to me, but.
Massachusetts, I think there are changes in the climate, but it's more of a natural phenomenon. It's not man-made. I agree with Cindy. Before we really know what are the reliable sources of energy, we should not just switch to solar or green energy, which could be more costly, including electric cars. My daughter, when she stops to charge her electric car, this electric energy is created by gasoline or coal. I believe we need to do something to reduce pollution, change urban living, relying on more multiple units and density and public transportation, etc., and not to be dictated by climate change as a political agenda or as a religion.
Danny, West Hollywood. Certainly pollution is having an effect on our environment, and that pollution mostly comes from manufacturing and sourcing power. And yeah, I just think we do need regulations. I will say during the pandemic, when everybody was forced to stay home for a while, I think the planet was the happiest it's been in a long time.
Let it be noted that Cindy was applauding as you said that.
There's got to be something said for the positive things that happened during the pandemic to our climate. And I think we'd be foolish to ignore that our hurricanes are getting stronger, our twisters are coming in more multiple and larger sizes, our heat is getting hotter. I was in Phoenix and it's like, oh my gosh, it's May and it's 113 degrees outside. That's crazy. So let's pay attention to people whose jobs it is to analyze the data. And when they say that we're destroying our planet, listen.
Chris, Charlotte.
We have to get beyond acknowledging the reality of climate change and focusing on solutions because the data doesn't lie. I mean, there are boatloads of advanced degree scientists who study this stuff for a living, who stake their professional credibility and reputation on the data and body of knowledge that they pull together. And they're telling us that the climate is changing and humankind is responsible for a large degree of that. We're pumping more CO2 into the environment than ever before. And CO2 is a greenhouse gas that traps heat. As a result, air temperatures rise, water temperatures rise, glaciers melt, sea levels rise. All of these things can be attributable to climate change. Honestly, what do we lose by focusing more on renewable energy, on cleaner energy? What's wrong with more turbines, wind turbines? What's wrong with more solar panels? What's wrong with more hydroelectric or electric vehicles? The fact is, the world is growing more populated, and with that comes a greater dependence on energy. So why can't we focus more on clean energy as part of that mix?
Gabby, Connecticut. While we don't necessarily know what the answers are, one thing that I really don't like is doing nothing for fear that it will be the wrong thing, because doing nothing is worse than getting some of it wrong, because some of it you're going to get right. We have to continue to explore all types of solutions and learn when they aren't working well and then pivot, right? If we pretend that we have no impact, then that's about as foolish as I think we can be.
Adolfo, Louisiana. There's less Louisiana than there was when I was a child. Coastal erosion and the Gulf of Mexico has whittled away at the coast. There's less Florida than there used to be. There will continue to be less coastline as waters rise. I do think both sides engage in what Gio called fear-mongering. I think that's absolutely on point. But when something doesn't work in my house that I can't fix, I trust the expert to tell me what's wrong and what I should do. We should start trusting climate scientists and then partner with other places in Europe and Central South America, et cetera, who are doing things based on what climate scientists recommend. We are not going to like, as Gabby said, every solution that's offered to us, but we have to balance our comfort level that we're used to with what is changing. This is a fight, right? We're Americans. We can do this.
Alfred, Hawaii. I agree with Adolfo. We had to get legislation passed, like to limit the amount of CFCs that were going into the atmosphere. That's what stopped the hole in the ozone layer. At the end of the day, I think it's about unfettered capitalism and being able to just burn as much carbon as you want. But when you look at the science, you look at how much carbon we can put into our atmosphere before we change our environment permanently and raise the standard temperature of our environment, that's a problem, right? It's about saving humanity because the planet will be fine without us. We're saving ourselves when it comes to environmental issues. The planet will recover. We won't.
Susan, California. Well, climate change in general is absolutely frightening. It's not just the wildfires, it's the extreme weather in every form. And unless we get carbon emissions under control, there's going to be a tipping point that we won't come back from. It is an issue of international importance. We need international cooperation. But the fact of the matter is that the United States is one, if not the biggest emitter of carbon emissions.
Brian, Richmond, general thoughts on climate change. Listening to Susan speak about the wildfires in California. I was up your way when the smoke from Canada came down. It is troublesome that a lot of people that are anti-climate change, or whatever, however you want to say that, and they talk about cycles of the earth and ice ages and all these things. The bottom line is that we have a lot of people and we need a lot of water. And if things keep getting hotter, I just worry, where's this water? How are people to stay alive?
Karen, Chicago. There are more than 8 billion people on this planet. I don't know scientifically enough about the topic to make a contribution to the comments, but our world population is enormous. And I feel that contributes to climate change and changes in the ecology of our planet.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. I don't have a super strong opinion about this topic, but I will say that global warming is being taught as a fact in the schools, and it is really only a theory. And also, I think it's really ironic that politicians will use their private jet to go to these conferences on global warming and climate change. And private jets are one of the biggest emitters of pollution. That makes no sense to me.
Brian, Richard, the other thing with climate change is that I don't think enough people actually care about it to do anything about it. The Ford F-Series truck is one of the largest selling vehicles in the United States. We're talking seriously about climate change when we're really not doing anything about it of substance.
Sanjay, New York City. I don't think people have fully grasped how severe and dire the situation is in terms of climate change. We've started to see even more unpredictable and extreme weather across the world. Weather that shouldn't be happening in certain geographic locations is happening for the first time ever or in hundreds of years. This is truly an issue that it does not matter your socioeconomic background. Mother Nature can make places uninhabitable. If we don't do coordinated action across the world, the climate change situation is just going to accelerate. It's sad that we withdrew from the Paris Accords. It's hard to think of the United States as a leading figure in this battle when we've made such poor decisions about who's been in charge of our country.
Let's talk about democracy. It's a topic that gets put out there a lot. We're hearing it from both political parties. Is democracy at risk in the U.S.? Is it something you worry about?
Cindy, New Hampshire, I do believe that democracy is at risk. I went to my town and I watched them test the voting machines. and I was treated terribly. They asked me, "Why are you here? We haven't had anybody check on us in 20 years." So I was like, isn't that a good reason why I should be coming? you know? And the interesting thing was they tested the test mode, but on voting day, they do the machine on voting mode. So there's two different modes. That's kind of fishy. And even if everything's on the up and up with the tallies and everything with the machine itself, because I have also worked the day of the voting, it is exhausting. Like I was so tired. It is a very difficult task to count the votes, even when you have machines. I do believe that there are a lot of different ways in which the vote needs to be tidied up. Also, there are a lot of people who don't even vote. When somebody says, I don't want to vote because my vote doesn't really matter, I tell them, you're the 35th person that told me that. So they'll realize if all 35 had voted, I won school board by just 13 votes. Voting is a very serious thing and we shouldn't take it lightly.
Chris, Charlotte, I worry about the integrity and the future of our institutions and people's understanding and appreciation for those things and trust in them. I think of particularly our Constitution, regardless of what side of the political fence we sit on, whether we're more progressive or more conservative, as long as our guiding light is the Constitution, we'll be fine. The challenge is finding those candidates who are constitutionally literate and understanding the historical context in which we're operating.
Hong, Massachusetts. I don't think democracy is at risk. It's a work in process in that today's American society is different from what it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. We have different jobs, different priorities, different problems to deal with. No matter who the president is, that person should not be influenced too much by interest group, money-oriented groups, but to face the real world, real people, how to bring food onto the table, how to bring the shelter, how to bring clothes to our people, bring jobs, and bring more harmony and more dialogues among people, communities, and nations.
Danica, West Hollywood. I think democracy is very much at risk. And part of it is because sometimes we're a little too polite. So I'm not going to be so polite. I'm just going to say when one of the two people running to be president of the United States has a reputation for being a racist and a fraudster, is a convicted felon, and he has entirely taken over a political party and rewards the people who show him loyalty, and who has said that he will be a dictator on the first day that he's in office again, that he will use his power to punish those people who have gone against him. We already have his Supreme Court bending the Constitution to fulfill what he wants. If he is elected our president, democracy is going out the window. The Constitution will be shredded. As Hong said, democracy is in progress, but Donald Trump and his cronies want to take that progress and rewind it back to 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And the rights that we fought for and finally achieved are totally taken away.
Cindy, New Hampshire. I don't think we can place a judgment on any of these candidates who have held office because number one, we don't really know the truth. Okay. We need to admit that right now. Number two, I was raising a family when we had Bill Clinton, if you want to name names. I was so sick and tired of seeing this garbage and these inappropriate words for children. I appreciate your perspective though, because one person sees the head, one person sees the tail. I don't see it the way you see it, but I am glad to know of how you see it. But I don't trust in the person supposedly at the front of the country. I trust face to face. That's why I got involved in my town and talking to people. That's where we're going to make progress. Just talk to our neighbors and try to make friends and agree on little things. If we can't agree on the little things, then we won't agree on the big things either.
Gabby, Connecticut. I do think we are at some risk. I think we're seeing now more than ever that elected officials are serving the people less and really serving themselves. Once you're looking to benefit yourself rather than the greater good, then you start eroding away at what democracy is.
Geo, Texas, there's a study by an atheist named J.D. Unwin called Sex and Culture. And he talks about when the morality of a country starts declining, it's irreversible. Now, he studied all these empires, Rome, Greece, 80 in total. And based on his study, we are on a decline that is irreversible. And I tend to agree with him. We're in trouble as a nation. And I just pray that we can turn the tide. But according to J.D. Unwin, it's never been done before.
Are there some specifics that he mentioned or that you feel strongly about?
Yes, his main premise was when the family begins to be attacked and eroded, the sexual morals of a country begin to decline, leading to more hedonism and less duty and responsibility. And it just becomes a free for all.
Thank you. Adolfo?
I am worried about democracy in the future. We have in this country a person who was president who is accused of inciting an attempted coup. I remember January 6, 2021, people of all political stripes stunned by what they were seeing, whether they were conservative, whether they were progressive. And somehow we've forgotten that day to some degree. There's been an assault on fact as if we shouldn't believe what we saw with our eyes. I was stunned to discover just how perilous our democracy is when it comes to the sort of social norms that we just accepted. Presidents always did this. Senators always did this. It was predicated on the goodwill in your opponent. If there's not going to be goodwill, oh man, that's scary indeed. And we don't just see it here.
Sanjay, New York City. I continue to think about what happened on January 6th and how that's been turned into, oh, they were just protesting. It's a testament to the power of unified messaging from the Republican Party and the complicity of the right-wing media led by Fox News. I'm not looking forward to what is going to happen in the election in November. If Donald Trump is to be reelected, I don't think he will leave office peacefully. I think January 6, 2021 was dress rehearsal for what's to come if he is reelected.
Alfred, Hawaii.
It's always been evident to me that there are two systems of governance. There's one for the poor people and one for the rich people and the governing class. And lately, I've seen the fascist rhetoric really be at the forefront of things. And that's extremely scary for me because they go for the people that are different. In Germany in the 1920s and 30s, they were going after everybody that was different. I'm in that bucket, right? Like I'm a person of color. And so, yeah, I fear for my safety because with that rhetoric comes action from people that like to follow and don't think for themselves.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. I really like that our country has checks and balances, and I think that will help that not to happen. But I think presidents more and more are using executive order, and that's kind of scary.
Karen, Chicago. I'm a little scared to tell you the truth. Those checks and balances that we should have and are supposed to work for our government, I don't know if I trust the players on either side. I'm losing my trust in the people who are running our government, running our country.
Susan, California. I'm scared to death of the Supreme Court. It's not only overturning established law from 50 years, Roe v. Wade, but just recently gave President Trump immunity from prosecution from anything he did in his presidential capacity. And that is mighty loosely defined.
Kelly from Northern Virginia. The Supreme Court's always been controversial. Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court eliminated slavery. We have three branches, checks and balances on purpose.
Brian, Richmond, I kind of agree with what Susan was saying. If the president has total immunity, then you don't have checks and balances. They only work when everyone has to play by the same rules, and he doesn't. So now we've changed the foundation of democracy.
Go ahead, Kelly.
So there are still checks and balances. If the other branches don't agree with the Supreme Court, they can challenge it. For example, AOC is trying to impeach the judges. So, even if I don't agree with her, the checks and balances are still there.
Susan?
There was an interesting piece in the New York Times from Lawrence Tribe, who's one of the great constitutional scholars. And he's saying that what is needed is a fourth branch of government, an attorney general who is chosen separate from the president, who is not answerable to the president, who would have prosecution authority. He points out that 40 US states currently have that system of checks and balances on governors.
It's a point I hadn't thought about. That is a separate entity in most states. Something to think about. Kelly?
Interesting. I'd have to read more about a fourth branch of government, but interesting concept.
Okay, thank you. There is a lot of political energy going toward saying that the U.S. is a champion of democracy and should be, and others saying that there are other issues at work here. I'd like to know whether you think there is a growing confrontation between democracy and authoritarianism worldwide, and if so, what role should the U.S. play?
Chris, Charlotte, I worry that the United States is losing its moral authority in terms of democracy. We've got a gravitation to the polar opposites. In the past 100+ years, there's always been authoritarian governments, whether it's the Soviet Union or today's Russia or the Islamic republics of Iran and even Saudi Arabia. Those will always be with us. In democratic societies, the gravitation toward populist figures who appeal to basest fears and prejudices as opposed to our better natures is something I worry about. It's certainly something that we've seen here in the United States. And you see those trends in Europe, in countries like Hungary, even in France, England as well. That sort of populist nationalist sentiment is troubling.
Massachusetts, I think it's time for the United States to really give some self-reflections on being a leader of the free world, what we can do to help calm down finding alternative approach to war. We have to find a coexistence, learn to look at each other eyes to eyes and learn to talk, to negotiate, and to go in a peaceful way to resolve resolutions, to show real models for the rest of the world.
Cindy, is there a confrontation growing worldwide between the democratic states and the authoritarian states?
Honestly, world news is not my forte, but from what I hear, I feel like war is more about economics. It's a money thing. And I'm not sure they want to negotiate. I'm not sure that that's really the goal. And that's really sad. This takes all of us saying we don't want to be pawns in this game. And we have that ability in our country. I think the last few years we've instilled fear, we've instilled doubt. It's up to us to start telling our young people what they could do and what their future could be if they get up and just start really getting into the game.
Danny, West Hollywood, I'm not a conspiracist, but it does feel like there's a cabal of people who brunch every Sunday and say, this is how I'm going to take over my country and what I'm going to do. It's a little bit scary if one of the people who's running for president identifies the leaders of North Korea, Russia, all dictators as his heroes. There's a problem there. We built the United States because we wanted to get away from the king in England. We wanted a democracy where people had their say. And it seems like someone wants to return us to where there's one person in the country who says what we do, and he's surrounded himself with everybody who's telling him yes. The United States has gone into many countries to fight and bring them democracy. If Trump wins, who's going to come save us?
Alfred, Hawaii. As the United States, it seems like we're pushing the idea of fascism to the rest of the world. I think we're the leaders in that. I don't know how that changes. Like Gio said in mentioning the book, that seems to be the way it's going to go, because I don't see enough power on the side of people fighting for justice to make that change. It's been gone for a long time.
Adolfo, Louisiana. I do think we are seeing from people a rise in desire for a strong man to lead them. Alfred was spot on. There is one set of rules that apply to one group of people and another set for the rest of us. We hear it here about draining the swamp, and what they give instead is certainly less than what they promised. But they make these promises based on legitimate concerns that people have about the direction of their nation. And I don't think we should mitigate those concerns. I don't think it's wise to ignore the challenges that immigration has placed on Europe and other places. I don't think it's wise to ignore what globalism has done from an economic perspective. We are susceptible to those who make promises to deliver by any means necessary. My preference is that the United States lead by example and embrace democracy in all of its messiness, in all of its ugliness, but in all of its glory and truth too, and allow that to be the guide for the world.
Geo, Texas, America was the beacon of hope for the world, right? There are things that are definitely wrong with America, but we're the best the world has to offer. We still have religious freedom. We still have the ability to climb the economic ladder. I'm a Christian minister, but I actually, in certain aspects, fear more the Christian nationalist movement than I do the far left crazy movement. Look at Louisiana, this notion of wanting to put the 10 Commandments in school system. Oklahoma, talking about forcing people to teach the 10 Commandments. I'm all for the 10 Commandments, but I would love everybody to follow the 10 Commandments out of persuasion and because they believe them, not because the government sword is behind it.
Adolfo.
I think we see 100% eye to eye on that. The state deciding what the 10 Commandments mean for everyone makes me very nervous as a teacher and as a churchgoer. So, Gio, thank you.
Gabby, Connecticut. My parents came here seeking political asylum and got political asylum. My sister and I were raised that we are Americans, that this is the best that the world has to offer. My parents were very proud American citizens. It's been very recently where I have found that I am losing trust in the people that are governing us. It feels like the interests are changing and more often not for the better. It makes me sad. It's not something I want to see for my children's lives. I want them to feel proud and to feel like their best interests are held at heart.
Geo, Texas, Gabby, I share your concern, but sometimes I think people lose faith in the governing officials and equate that to losing faith in the Constitution. As Adolfo mentioned earlier, it can be amended, and if we need to amend it, let's follow the proper procedures to amend it. That being said, there's a quote that I love by John Adams. He says, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." In other words, if we lose what makes us civil, and Adolfo had mentioned this earlier, I miss when we can debate and still be civil with one another. Now the rhetoric is all like diss tracks, like if we're rappers trying to diss each other for the next level. And I pray that somehow there could be a national revival. Now, that being said, what I mentioned earlier about Christian nationalism, they see the lack of spirituality and moral values, and they want to force that. And I'm totally against that. It should be religious liberty that people worship based on their conscience. I view the nation as in a tight spot because, as Adolfo mentioned, that's when people look for the strong man to give the easy solution. Well, the strong man is never correct. That's what our founding documents were against. George Washington actually turned down being a king. They wanted to put him on the throne. But we have this representative republicanism, democracy that has held us for this long.
Brian Richmond, the landscape globally looks a lot different than it did even 5-10 years ago, with China, with Russia, their stances, with the war in Ukraine, all of these factors. The United States is getting pushed towards confrontation, whether we like it or not. Is there a breaking point there? I'm sure there is. I don't know what that is, but the next couple of years, it's going to be interesting to see.
Susan, California. Well, I agree with Brian that it's hard to figure out what is the right role for the U.S. to play around the world. We chose to back Ukraine, not because it was a member of NATO, but because we felt that this was Putin's first step in trying to encircle himself with countries that would be reporting to Russia. We haven't quite figured out what role the United States should play, for example, in Israel. These are extraordinarily complicated decisions, and that's why it is real important whom we elect president.
Karen, Chicago. Should the United States get involved in those conflicts? Well, they may have to. I like the way that Susan put it. These are very complicated situations. Did the United States think that they were going to be involved in World War II at the very beginning? Maybe not, but look what happened in that situation. And when Vietnam had their civil war, the policy of the United States was to intervene to fight communism, so I don't know what the answer is, but I think that at some point the United States does have to get involved, but it depends on the nature of the conflict.
Sanjay, New York City. I feel like we have no place on the global stage anymore because of what we've allowed to happen inside our own country. It's hypocritical to talk about authoritarians like Vladimir Putin or President Xi, and then you look at what's going on in our own country and what some of the things that Donald Trump stands for, what our Supreme Court ruled on, essentially saying the president is a king, essentially giving him carte blanche to do whatever he wants like a king. We may think we're a constitutional republic, but I think that is becoming further and further from the truth.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. I agree with everyone that it's a complicated issue. Like on one hand, we want to still be known as the world power, but on the other hand, do we want to get involved in every conflict? You made a good point when you said in World War II, we tried to stay out of it and nobody knew what was to come. If China invades Taiwan, are we going to step in? I follow Chinese news a lot, and I do think there's something looming with China. They're amping up their propaganda against the United States, and they're coming into the United States and buying up farm property. And this is scary. I used to teach online ESL in China, and the government just decided, nope, we don't want Americans teaching anymore.
Does anyone else want to comment on China? That was actually my next question. Specifically, where does the U.S. take the China relationship from here?
Chris, Charlotte. I think the best way to deal with China is to continue to be engaged with emerging economies in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, because that's where China is starting to exert more influence economically and militarily. We need to continue to be strong allies to Taiwan. We need to focus on reinforcing our relationships with Japan and Korea, as well as strengthening trading partnerships in Southeast Asia, including Vietnam. The other way to deal with them is to reduce our dependence on trade with them. So many of our consumer products are sourced in China. So many raw materials and ingredients are coming from China. I think we should focus on developing some of those supply chains within our borders, but if that's not feasible, focusing on Latin America. The more we invest in building supply sources in those economies, the more it stabilizes those nations and creates pathways for economic growth for citizens in those countries. And as a result, leads to less pressure on our southern border and on our immigration systems.
Cindy, New Hampshire, I taught kids online in China how to speak English with a Native American accent. I became good friends with the students. They're so eager to learn and they love their teachers, and it was the most fun job I've ever had. And in 2021, the government regulations in China shut us down. And that showed me that it is really important to speak to the citizens in China and not to get caught up in the political beliefs of government. And as far as products going back and forth, I feel like we should be careful on how much we allow being produced over in China and then brought over to America. We should do as much as we can to be self-sufficient. And we should also be concerned with how the people are treated that create products in China. We should not get into any wars with China.
Danny, West Hollywood. I don't know much about the U.S.-China relationship, so I won't say anything except that right now they don't seem to be our friends.
Geo, Texas. When it comes to China and the United States, I think they're both playing a big game of chicken. I think in the end, China can't sustain their pace. They don't have enough children in the pipeline. And I think the spirit of the Chinese people living under communists is not as strong and robust as American ideal to freedom. Now, our country's a hot mess as well, but nevertheless, in this game of chicken, I think the United States will always come out on top.
Alfred, Honolulu. In general, when it comes to the major superpowers like the US, Russia, and China, there seems to be a shift about to happen. We don't have the one superpower feel anymore as a country. It seems like China and Russia may be in a position to make changes on the world stage.
Gabby, Connecticut. We need to keep an eye on China. They have shown signs of aggression in a military sense as well as economic. We need to make sure that we aren't surprised by their actions.
Adolfo, Louisiana. I'm very much an outsider looking in when it comes to that relationship. What I do know about China is that they are, in some sense, the merging of materialism and totalitarianism. And at the same time, they are a huge trade partner. We are intertwined in a way that makes me uncomfortable. I think we need to move forward in pressing China for more fair labor practices for the Chinese people if we're going to continue to do trade.
Susan, California. Taiwan is looking at the relationship between Taiwan and Ukraine as far as the likelihood of being invaded by a much greater power. China claims that Taiwan is an integral part of China, even though the Taiwanese population identifies itself as Taiwanese, not Chinese, and the Taiwanese have democracy. Taiwan is busy arming itself extensively because the Taiwanese say, we've learned from Ukraine that other countries are more willing to step in if they see that we're going to help ourselves.
Brian, Richmond, to Kelly's point about the Chinese buying up land in the Midwest, that is true. And they're also actually buying water rights all over America, not just the Midwest, because China's not going to be able to feed their population.
I highly recommend the China Show on YouTube. These two guys lived in China for 10 years, even married Chinese women. They have insider information because they still talk to people in China. They're on WeChat with people. So they'll say like, okay, this is the propaganda that you're seeing and hearing in the news, but this is what we're hearing from people who actually live there.
Several of you mentioned Ukraine. The U.S. has been obviously a heavy supporter of Ukraine since the Russians invaded. Should this continue, and if so, in what way?
Chris, Charlotte, I don't know how anybody who has studied the events of the last 100 years would even think about opposing our efforts to rally around Ukraine along with our partners in NATO. What's happening right now is alarming. Putin wants to redraw the borders in Europe in a way that brings back the Soviet Empire. I think it's naive to think that he just wants this little territory in Ukraine. He wants the whole country, and he's not going to stop there. He wants to go into the Baltics, into Georgia, and other former satellite states of the Soviet Union to reestablish the Soviet Empire. And he's willing to throw Europe into a level of crisis, turmoil, and bloodshed, the likes we haven't seen since World War II.
Cindy, New Hampshire, I think the U.S. should be instrumental in providing help for the citizens, but stay out of the political battles that are in foreign affairs, because we should be protecting our own country.
Danny, West Hollywood. U.S. should help Ukraine as much as possible and keep Putin from taking over any more territories. And we should stick with NATO. It has worked well for us and other nations to keep democracy alive in the world.
Gabby, Connecticut. I believe that freedom around the world provides safety for those of us at home. We've seen that time and time again in history. I wish I had a good answer for how to come to some sort of resolution with a lot of the conflicts that are going on around the world. I do think that we can't just focus on problems at home, that problems in other parts of the world can eventually lead to problems at home. And we can't just ignore those and hope that they go away. History has shown that we oftentimes do provide solutions for the world's problems.
Texas, I'm like Gabby. I really don't have a strong opinion. I do wish there would be peace there. People deserve their national sovereignty. And so that would mean a free Ukraine. I don't like sometimes where we seem to half measure the thing. Either we're going to be all in or all out. And I'm not talking about troops on the ground. I'm talking about in diplomacy, the back channels. Just take a strong stance either way. I just don't like wishy-washy with anything. Either be clear in or out.
Adolfo, Louisiana. The consensus seems to be that Russia growing to the size that it was during the days of the USSR, reclaiming those territories seems to be a bad thing, certainly because of who is currently there in Russia. I can't criticize any administration, whether previous or current. I don't see back channels. But we gave our word. And if we gave our word as a country, it seems it's in America's interest to honor our word.
Alfred, Hawaii. I don't think we should be in Ukraine because it seems like we're spending way too much money overseas and ignoring the people here. And if you can't take care of your own people and all these problems in America, but you're willing to spend billions of dollars overseas for what I would only assume to be some kind of financial gain because of historical precedent, I'm going to have a problem with it.
Kelly, Northern Virginia, this is a tough one. When the war in Ukraine first came out, I was very much for defending them. We're spending a lot of money with the argument that we need this in America, but I don't want Russia to overtake Ukraine. They may overtake other countries. It's a complicated issue.
Karen, Chicago. The United States should continue to support Ukraine against Russia. I'm not a warmonger or war hawk, but I think that the preservation of Ukraine as an independent country is important. We just finished discussing China. If you're wondering about the threat of worldwide authoritarianism, having China and Russia taking over other countries is not a very good outlook for the world as far as democracy goes.
Susan, California. I recently heard General Mark Milley talk about Ukraine. He said that it's a stalemate. It's costing both sides huge amounts of money and people. And at some point, both sides are going to have to sit down at the negotiating table and hammer out something they can both live with.
Brian, Richmond, Ukraine is difficult and worrisome for all the reasons that have been already been stated. With Ukraine's location, if we were to send troops, that could bait China and Russia into combining to fight the United States. So it seems we remain reactionary. And that's never historically proven to be a good way to solve a conflict.
Thank you. Let's take that into the conflict between the Israelis and some in the Arab world. And it's the same question. How should our country be involved or not involved going forward?
Cindy, New Hampshire, I do believe in protecting Israel as a sovereign nation, and I do believe that they are prepared to take care of themselves, and I would like to see the U.S. keep helping Israel, but I'm not exactly sure how that should be done.
Danny, West Hollywood. I think that Israel should find a resolution to this conflict without engaging in genocide. And if they are going to continue to engage in activities that may not be intended to be genocide, but actually are, we should not support them in that.
Alfred, Hawaii, that one's hard because the United States is very much intertwined with Israel. There's so much lobbying when it comes to Israel. And the fact that we've sent billions to Israel for its defense and they have free healthcare, it rubs me the wrong way. And the fact that this is a genocide is a problem for me.
Adolfo, Louisiana. Alfred is right. Israel's response is genocidal in nature. By the same token, October 7th happened. People were kidnapped. Women were raped in the street. People were beheaded. There are still hostages that were taken by Hamas. Now, whether a 5-year-old Palestinian child is the one who should suffer for the crimes of Hamas is another argument altogether. And that's where I don't agree with Israel and what they've done. So I find myself in an odd position. I have been for a long time in favor of a Palestinian state. I am also for Israel's right to exist and thrive and the people of Israel to be there. What I am for, first and foremost, there has to be peace in this situation. Netanyahu is committing war crimes. I don't want to hold Israelis accountable for the mistakes of their leaders, nor do I want to hold the people of Palestine accountable for the mistakes of those who lead Hamas. So what I'm hoping for is for common sense to prevail. What needs to happen is everyone be able to live and thrive.
Geo, Texas, I was in Israel. I was able to have a conversation with Israeli Jews about my faith in Jesus Christ. If I were to cross the border into Gaza, I'd be dead in 5 minutes trying to have the same conversation. I am pro-Israel, not for religious reasons, but because they're the only democracy in that part of the world that still respects religious liberty. There are Muslims there. The mosque is there. There are other religions that worship within Israel that are accepted and not bothered. You couldn't do that with Hamas. I am pro-Israel in the sense of that they should be able to defend themselves. Obviously, any war crime needs to be held accountable.
Thank you. Go ahead, Adolfo.
A correction to Gio's comment that I need to make. There are Palestinian Christians. There are bishops in Palestine who are Palestinians. They don't live in Israel. They live in Palestine. As Israel expanded into Palestine, they also took homes from Christians, not just Muslims. I'd also like to point out that Hamas was elected as a political party. They have democracy too. Not the way that we do, certainly not. But there is a form of religious liberty in Palestine. There is Christianity practiced there, and that needs to be said.
Go ahead, Gio.
There are definitely areas where people can worship. But if I try to speak to a Hamas leader about Christianity and conversion and all that, and if a gay person, any part in Palestine, tries to have a gay pride parade like they do here in the United States, there they will be killed. And in Israel, they do have that kind of religious liberty. But I'm referring more to government philosophy, not the individual people.
Gabby, Connecticut. Gosh, I mean, peace in the Middle East may be one of the top 3 toughest problems to crack in the world. To some degree, this has been festering for so long, and I don't see us reaching a solution. I know that sounds terrible and really pessimistic, but I mean, I've thought about it and thought about it, and I just don't see it.
Go ahead, Adolfo.
Thank you. What can't happen is the demonization of Jewish people in the United States because of a conflict between Israel and Palestine. There is a rise in anti-Semitism, and regardless of Netanyahu's policies, regardless of war crimes, atrocities, etc., for a Jewish person in the United States to feel afraid to go to work, to go to temple, to go to class, any of those sorts of things, completely unacceptable.
Thank you. Go ahead, Gio.
Liberty of conscience should be the guiding light in the majority of issues. And wherever we see that thriving, we need to protect it.
Brian Richmond, I think the United States is going to be forced to sit back and do nothing because the region is so unstable. Unless by some miracle, Israel and Palestine can come together and hash this out. And then you're talking about helping Palestine to nation build the way that those people want you to in a region where stability hasn't existed in 200 years.
Sanjay, New York City. One of the deciding factors for me in the upcoming election has been what has been happening between Israel and Palestine and Gaza. I've had a very difficult time grasping the reactions of so many people about what is happening there. I think it really does follow along racial lines. If the roles were reversed, let's say there is a country where the majority of people in power are people of color, and they were essentially having apartheid rule against a minority of white people, there would not be the same reaction. What Hamas did on October 7th is deplorable and awful, but I think the Israeli response, aided by the United States government, is appalling. The innocent slaughter of people, regardless of whether they are Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, is wrong. What Hamas did to innocent people on October 7th does not excuse what has happened since then. The response has made Jewish people in Israel and across the world less safe. It has made Muslim people in Palestine and across the world less safe. I don't think Hamas could have asked for a better recruiting tactic than what Israel has done to the citizens of Gaza. It saddens me to see that this continues.
Karen, Chicago. I am conflicted about what level of involvement the United States should have in the conflict between Arab countries and Israel. Israel certainly should defend itself. There is a lot of Jewish hate out in the world, and that needs to come to an end. I'm not pleased with the way Netanyahu is handling the conflict, but I don't have enough information, nor do I trust the information that we are provided to say that maybe we should not be intervening.
Susan, California. Hamas is not just another Arab entity. It is, as General Mark Milley of the Chiefs of Staff under President Trump said, it is like Nazis were to the Jews in Europe. It has vowed for the complete elimination of the state of Israel and the killing of all Israelis. The attack on Israel on October 7th appears to have been designed to encourage Israel to overreact, and that's exactly what Israel did. It took the bait and it killed so many innocent Palestinian women and children that now it's brought all sorts of condemnation down on Israel. It's very important that the United States continue to very diligently behind the scenes nudge Israel and Hamas into a ceasefire agreement, and to hope that with a ceasefire agreement, Israel can repair its ties with other Arab neighbors. It had been in the process of coming up with agreements with one after another neighboring Arab country. It was about to come up with an agreement with the Saudis, and that may be, in fact, why Hamas struck when it did. It's terribly important for the long-term future of Israel and its security, for there to be agreements with all those Arab neighbors, and certainly a ceasefire agreement with Hamas in Gaza is a very important first step.
Concerns about age have sure shaken up the presidential race. Instead of two candidates who are older citizens, we now have one. Should age still be a factor for voters?
Sanjay, New York City. I do think that the age is going to matter.
Geo, Texas. I don't think age is an actual problem if the person comes across as competent and robust and healthy and with the ability to finish the term they would be voted into.
Cindy, New Hampshire. Some people can do very well up until a very old age. I think people that are older have more wisdom and they have experience on their side. I think age is more of a problem when the person is younger because they don't have all of the life experiences to draw from. But I also know that some people, when they're older, start losing their memory and their ability to think clearly, etc. And I think that is more of a problem than age itself.
Chris, Charlotte. I think age will be an issue in this year's election. Kamala Harris is 18 years younger than Donald Trump, exudes youthfulness and energy in ways that President Biden just could not.
Massachusetts. For the presidential election, age is not an issue. My mother, 93 years old, is as alert as she has always been. Whereas other people in the 60s and 70s may already suffer from dementia and other mental conditions. The most important thing I would like everyone to consider is who would be less likely to start a war, who would likely be artful in negotiating with a foreign country, a counterpart, for a win-win situation, and who can help lead our country to normal economically, financially, socially.
Alfred, Hawaii. I think age will be one of many factors people take into account when they're going to the voting booths.
Gabby, Connecticut. Age can diminish cognitive ability and functioning, but also while we have protections for when a president dies in office, it's certainly not an ideal situation. It causes some level of instability. And I think as a nation, we should be trying to avoid that situation. I think it's somewhat irresponsible.
Adolfo, Louisiana. It is absolutely going to be a factor. A president in this day and age at least has to appear a certain way, whether or not that's fair, whether or not that's just. It's sort of immaterial. We're very much at an age where appearance matters, and a president who appears frail is not going to do as well at the ballot box.
Brian, Richmond, the pressure of that job, the stress, the hours. I don't think it's realistic or healthy or just smart at all to have an 80-year-old as the commander in chief. It's not ageism, okay? Maybe it is, and I really don't care. The president should ideally be someone you don't have to worry about falling asleep at 3:00 in the afternoon in a meeting because they've had a long day.
Susan, California. In a perfect world, we would have younger people as the candidates from both parties. But that's not what we've got. And I think all of us need to get very practical about who we think would do the best job of running the country for the next 4 years.
Karen, Chicago. Yes, age does matter. My father is 82 years old, and he's always been a brilliant man and still is. He didn't retire until he was almost 79. He ran a New York corporation for decades, and everyone had utmost confidence in him. But Should he be doing all of that now? No. We age and we get tired and our health goes and our memory goes, and it's nothing that's bad against the character of another person. It's just the aging process.
Kelly from Northern Virginia. I don't think it's age so much as competency because different people start losing their health and their mind at different ages. How about do a test? Do some kind of medical and mental test to decide if they're competent enough.
Thank you. Do you think gender and race will be important factors for voters in the presidential election?
Chris, Charlotte, you do have some voters who sadly just won't accept a woman as president of the United States, a candidate who is energizing the base and giving a credible face and voice to the issue of women's health and reproductive freedom. I think that could be a motivating factor that helps turn out the vote.
Geo, Texas. I think the gender of Ms. Harris being a woman is going to play a factor. I've already seen online some people saying they're voting for her simply because she's a woman of color. And so let's see, but I don't think it'll be sufficient to sway the outcome of the presidential vote.
Adolfo, Louisiana. I think there is an element for whom one candidate's race, their being a person of color, is absolutely going to matter, and certainly that they're a woman as well. I think there are just certain people, usually older, who just are used to an older way of thinking about those sorts of things. Conversely, though, and I'm including myself in this, I believe that there are voters who are going to vote for Kamala Harris, at least in part because she is a woman and a woman of color. I look at that positively as an opportunity to sort of fulfill the promise of America in that regard.
Brian, Richmond, race and gender will be an issue for millions of voters this election. It's the first time an African-American woman has run for president. How big of an issue depends on a lot of variables with that. But yeah, I think it's going to be a big issue.
Danny, West Hollywood. Gender and race will play a big part in the presidential election. Joe Biden stepping aside and putting Kamala up as the candidate has re-energized many Democrats, and I think a big part of that is because she's a woman and she's black, and that is very exciting. I mean, other than the fact that she's qualified for the position.
Han, Massachusetts, I do not think voters will focus on gender. Voters are looking for the qualities, the characters, the abilities, and above all, the record of their past performances, jobs, living experiences, and so on. Their record to indicate if they have the qualities to be the commander-in-chief, the executive officer, the president in the White House.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. I do not think that gender or race will play a factor in the election. I am seeing more and more YouTube videos of people who are African American and other races saying that they are voting for Trump. Of course, there will always be people that will vote for Kamala Harris just because she's a female or just because she is Indian and black and whatever else. But I encourage everybody to vote based on policy.
Sanjay, New York City. I do think gender and race will be important factors for voters for a few reasons. Number one, the Republican Party has revived what I'll call birtherism 2.0, questioning whether Vice President Harris is really black. This is a racist line of attack, and I find it even more appalling considering J.D. Vance's own wife is Indian and his children are half Indian, like Vice President Harris. I think this attack will turn off the majority of Americans. The sexist attacks against Vice President Harris, such as saying that she laughs too much, are said because she's a woman. And I think it'll be even more important when you look at gender through the lens of a woman's right to choose. in light of what happened with the Dobbs ruling. Women have seen many states have enacted draconian abortion bans. And I think not only women will view that, but men will view that and hear from their wives about how these policies don't help women and are invasive.
Alfred, Hawaii. I think that race and gender will definitely play a huge role this election because it's historically always played a huge role. In this election in particular, we've seen things like 1619 Project being banned in certain schools. We're talking about Project 2025, where they're trying to remove the abortion pill from stores across the nation. There's plenty of examples where people who have no business trying to make rules about somebody else's experience, doing so in the guise of helping the nation.
Cindy, New Hampshire. I think that as far as who we are voting for, people will vote for the issues rather than which gender is running and which race of the person is running.
Karen, Chicago. Yes, I think that race and gender will play a role in the presidential election. I would like to think that those factors do not influence people, but they do.
Susan, California. Race and gender are clearly important factors for Trump and Vance, but not nearly so much for the rest of the electorate. Trump's efforts to portray Kamala as, quote, the other, by focusing on her blackness and Asian heritage just didn't stick. And Vance's sophomoric sideswipe about miserable, childless cat ladies left Republican leaders wondering why Trump picked Vance as his running mate. Kamala's doing what she said she'd do to earn support by talking about her priorities and her vision for a better, more diverse, more inclusive, and more harmonious nation. That message will squelch concerns about her gender or her race.
Our final topic. Do you think former President Trump's legal issues will matter to voters in November?
Cindy, New Hampshire. Some believe that these legal issues are kind of fabricated in order to keep him out of the White House. He seems to be pushing through. We'll see what happens. If people want to vote for him, then they're not going to matter. But if people don't want to vote for him, then they will matter.
Chris, Charlotte. I think it boils down to undecided and independent voters in a handful of states that will influence whether Donald Trump gets into office, and how many of those voters are troubled by his criminal conviction or have a problem with his previous term in office, his handling of COVID, his handling of other crises and issues, his economic policies. They'll have to weigh all of that. At the end of the day, I think he still maintains a rabid level of support. He's reshaped the GOP in his image. At the same time, Democrats are no more likely to vote for Trump than they were 4 and 8 years ago.
Danny, West Hollywood. I'm frightened that Trump's legal issues will not matter. They're major crimes. We've heard the tapes. We've heard him talk. Our country seems to be headed in a very scary direction, including no protection from the Supreme Court. So we have no one to count on to help us if Donald Trump is elected president and acts like a dictator.
Geo, Texas, I don't think Trump's legal issues will matter for voters in November. They're sick of the Democratic Party and the woke agenda.
Alfred, Hawaii. 38 felonies is a lot of felonies, but he has immunity for anything that can be considered in the line of his duties as a president. So I don't think it is going to matter.
Gabby, Connecticut. I don't think Trump's legal issues will sway voters one way or the other. Voters who support Trump aren't going to be convinced to vote for Harris or for a third-party candidate as a result of those legal issues. For the people for whom those legal issues are a big problem, I don't think any of them were going to support Trump without legal issues.
Adolfo, Louisiana. There is a large segment of the population that believes Donald Trump is fighting on the side of good, if not a personally good person, and they are willing to excuse everything that he has been accused of doing. It's going to matter to some people, but I'm not sure it's going to matter to enough people.
Brian Richmond, do I think his legal issues will hurt him? I don't at all, because Trump's supporters are all in for the ride. And they do not care that he had sex with a porn star while his wife was pregnant. They do not care about anything that he does that a lot of other people do care about. It is comical to me, but it's real in the polls. And whatever he does, it doesn't really matter to them. The only question is, can the Democratic Party find somebody that can be more popular than Trump?
Susan, California. Do I think former President Trump's legal issues will matter to voters in November? Not really. I think the people who are already in favor of Trump will continue to regard them as nothing but politically motivated prosecutions.
Kelly, Northern Virginia. I think Trump's legal matters will actually help his campaign. When he got indicted and when he got convicted, his donations went way up.
Sanjay, New York City. I think the people loyal to Trump could not care less. He said he could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and they'd still vote for him. And I think that is 100% true.
Thank you all very much. We've reached the last part of our A More or Less Perfect Union forum. There's no need to give your name or location. Let's say with the snap of your finger, you could run for any office in November. Tell us what the office would be and what would be your first action.
President of the United States, freeze on the budget. Not one more dollar, not one more penny be printed out.
Governor of New Hampshire, put all the patriots I have met and love that have stuck their neck out the last 4 years and install them, and we would be good to go.
House of Representatives push a bill to better enable mobility and transportation infrastructure.
President, ensure a clear separation between state and church.
Mayor, make sure the zoning is adequate for mixed-use housing. I see more community land trusts being built.
President, take corporate money out of politics.
Governor of Louisiana, free educators to educate in the classroom.
U.S. House of Representatives put in place policies about minimum wage and taxes that could help the economy.
Senate, campaign for more protections for farm workers and influence the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
President, affordable childcare.
President, expand the Supreme Court.
I would run the other way if anybody wanted me elected to public office. But if I could make one up, it would be official dog walker and craft person. Maybe if everybody got outside, walked the dog, had some fresh air, talked to other people, and did some crafts, that they would be more kind to each other.
What can I say? This was great. You got into it, didn't you? You put it out there, a nationwide picture of what people are thinking as we head toward the ballot box. Concisely, thoughtfully, and eloquently, you worked things through. Your dedication to and love for the USA shined through. We had a civil, respectful conversation, didn't we? There are different points of view represented here, but this is the way it should work, isn't it?
Yes, I know I disagreed with most of you, but I love the way that we stayed respectful through the whole thing. So this was a great group. Nice to meet you guys.
This is the way we seek to do it at Citizen Arts. I hope you all feel we did not steer the conversation toward defining where you stand politically or how you might vote in November. Our listeners might surmise where you might go, but for Citizen Arts, we want people to be talking to each other across political, ideological, social, religious points of view, and just getting to know each other a little better. And maybe if they also walk the dog, and do crafts, they will find ways to be more caring and respectful of one another. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
And
This
so
was great.
all of you, bless you and have a wonderful rest of day.
You too.
Appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Heartfelt thanks to our participants in a More or Less Perfect Union 2024. Adolfo, Alfred, Brian, Cindy, Chris, Danny, Gabby, Gio, Hong, Karen, Kelly, Sanjay, and Susan. Extraordinary. And to our listeners, dear friends, we so appreciate your lending an ear. We invite you to join the conversation. Let us know what you think. Citizen Arts is a 501c3 educational organization. We aim to present a range of constructive, compelling information, ideas, and opinions about important civic, social, and cultural matters. Jill Gabe is our executive producer. Jeff Lewis is producer and creative director. We wish all of you the very best. Please stay healthy in mind and body, wealthy in goodwill, and wise in action. See you at the polling place.